thank you all for coming and attending our second episode of our webinars. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping for the Zoom call. We are recording it, so it will be posted later. We have two chat boxes. One is the chat box and one is the Q&A. The chat box we like to use for all the technical issues. If you can't hear, something isn't pulling up right, go ahead and use that chat box. If you have any questions as we're going throughout the slide deck here, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box. This will allow other participants to vote your questions up. You can also see if anyone else has asked your question before posting it. Definitely feel free to ask any questions. We're happy to answer them if we can. The timeline for this meeting, we're hoping that it's going to be about 30 minutes, and that's about how the remaining episodes in our webinar series will be until our very last one, which we anticipate will be 45 minutes to an hour. So we're hoping to keep these pretty short and compact, but definitely if you do have questions, we aren't tied to that 30 minutes, so we can go over if we need to. Quick reminder, we are recording, and then we have our hosts. So Brenda Payton hosted our last CAS webinar on data with me. And then we also have John, I'm going to say your last name wrong, Maximic.
You said it right.
Yes. We have John from Receipt Bank who's joining us to talk a little bit about how they've helped us as a firm move forward and just tech stacks and ecosystems and the importance of developing those. We do have our disclaimer that we try to keep everything that we talk about as informational as possible and as accurate as possible, but different applications that change after we've discussed them. So, second ecosystem. Now, in our last episode, we talked about data and data integrity, what's good data, bad data, how long to keep information on file. Tony and Drew gave us some really great examples of the life cycle of data. And once you've identified those pieces of data, you have to figure out how you're going to manage it and how it moves throughout the system. Sounds like I'm breaking up a little bit. Brenda, is it getting any better as I go further?
A little bit, and I'm not sure if it's just me, but if anybody else is experiencing the breaking up, just let us know in the chat box.
Awesome, thank you. So we're talking about data and what you can do with it. And there's a couple words that go along with data, and that is tech stack and ecosystem. And they can mean different things to different people. To me, my tech stack is the technology that I use, and ecosystem is something that I always heard in regard to the earth, or how plants and human and animals all work together. It was very much of an organic situation. So it does sound like I'm a little choppy. Brenda, do you want to try our tech stack ecosystem?
Sure. How is my audio so far? Good? Okay. And I apologize, I was reading the comments here and I may not pick up right where Aaron left off here. But at JCCS, we have different tech stacks for our different service lines. So all of them, while they may be a little bit of an overlap between the service lines, our tax and our audit and our client advisory service lines, they all have their own proprietary softwares that we use. And so they just help us our day-to-day completing work. So whereas our ecosystem is a little bit broader, we think of the ecosystem as sort of like the Earth's ecosystem. So we've got the plants and the animals and the humans, and we all have to work together and we all have to be present in order to live and thrive. So when we think about that in business terms, it's the same thing. We need to have the people in the right seats, like we talked about in the data episode. We need to have the tools available to us, and then we also have to have the right tech in place. So once we have all of that together, the ecosystem really thrives and it just works really smoothly. So John, A question for you. So coming from the more technical side of things, does the tech stack and the ecosystem mean anything different to you?
So I think that you hit the nail pretty much on the head as far as what a tech stack is. Coming from my viewpoint, you know, I'm the account manager for JCCS, and so I work day in and day out with not only JCCS but a lot of other partners, other partner firms, to really figure out how ReceiptBank fits in. And I think that they did a great job of describing what a tech stack is. From our viewpoint, we also would just like to add that we think it also comes down to how you interpret the data and then apply it, because it's all about the flow of the information and how each stakeholder applies that information to the process and how they interact with the other stakeholders and the other apps in that ecosystem. Because the idea of a tech stack isn't necessarily to make the employee's job harder. It's meant to simplify the processes. So, and in the age of information overload, we're constantly bombarded with all these different charts, graphs, and different pieces of data. It's really only meaningful when you have someone to interpret it, which is a critical component of the ecosystem that's leveraging the information from the tech stacks. But again, it all has to be in sync with each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a lot of times we get so caught up in the weeds of making sure that the tech works properly that we forget about the outcome and, you know, what do we really need from this? Mm-hmm. And being able to leverage it the most that we can. And Erin, did you have anything to add before we move on to the next slide?
Not really. How's my sound? Do I sound okay?
It's come and go.
Okay. Not too much. You guys covered everything.
Okay, perfect. So next we're going to talk about the why. So if you have been involved with JCCS at all, you know that we are very big on the why. So we believe that if you can find your why, then the what and the how are going to come naturally. And so with that, when we were looking at our JCCS ecosystem and trying to determine our tech stack, that was the word at the forefront. Why? Why are we looking at this? Why are we evaluating our tech stack? And more importantly, what problems are we trying to solve? And then next, how do we properly vet that tech stack to make it successful? And then how are we going to gauge our success? So I'd like to ask John, why do you feel that it's so important to identify the ecosystem, and what do you see as the driving force to make changes?
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm unmuted here.
Yeah, you're good.
I think that one of the driving forces in the ecosystem is what's the need, is ultimately, I think, what you have to come up with. There are a few questions that we like to sort of pitch to businesses that we work with. Because when you're looking at a process, you need to sort of ask yourself a few questions. You know, how many steps does the process take? How much time does each step take? Which business functions or team members are involved? And what is the impact on the total cost and the quality of the process? It's not enough to have an ecosystem. It's trying to figure out, why am I even concerned with an ecosystem to begin with? Why am I even concerned with having something like this? And so I think the why is extremely, extremely important, which is exactly what you're really talking about. Is why should we identify that? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to simplify your process. You're trying to save money. There are a myriad of reasons why you might want to establish sort of a coherent tech stack in a coherent ecosystem. So really, it's just finding out what drives you the most.
So in your experience working with different clients, what do you find that why to be most often?
So That's a great question. I work with partners who are they range from the part-time bookkeeper, sole proprietor, all the way up to firms such as yourself that have a very large staff and large array of responsibilities. So the reasons could range from, I want to spend more time with my kids. It could range from something as simple as that. If that's meaningful, and if that is, if that will drive you to want to find a better way to do your, to have your process or to do your work, then that will drive you. For a lot of other firms, especially as we start to get in the medium to larger firms, usually a lot of it comes down to cost savings. It comes down to them wanting to figure out what exact type of service they want to provide, because there's a lot of busy work that can come with, especially in your respect with providing the advisory services, the tax work and things like that. There can be a lot of busy work that comes with that. So the why for these larger firms is usually we want to focus on the things that actually add value to our clients. And by extension, you would want to focus on the things that actually add value to your customers. So that, I think, is the biggest driver, is figuring out, is it money, is it time, or is it quality of service, and go from there.
I'd like to hop in and kind of echo that need doesn't have to be a monetary need. It can be, but it could be that you want to spend more time with your kids, or you want to focus on doing the job that you started the business to do. If you're a pottery business and you just want to build pottery, taking out the underlying processes and replacing them with some automation in your tech stack, and you spend more time doing what you love. And that kind of echoes back to the why a little bit. But it could be not only monetary, but also emotional or mental needs as well.
Yeah, definitely. Quality of life is always important. So
nowadays.
Yes. So in our last episode, we talked a lot about why it's important to properly manage the data workflow, and also what a successful data management looks like. We also talked about some of the pitfalls that we run into. When we at JCCS started to identify our ecosystem and our tech stack, we really needed to keep our workflow front of mind, and also the players. So when we look at that, how can we overlay our new tech stack with our existing workflow, or are there shifts that we need to make in that workflow? And then are there parts of our existing workflow that we can evolve that are going to change down the road? And so right here, we're going to talk about some examples. Erin, did you want to give this a shot, and we'll kind of cut you off if it gets too choppy here?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
This is what Erin lives for.
This is definitely my favorite. If you attended our first episode, you'll know that when we were talking about tech stacks, I was like, this is absolutely my favorite slide. You see two images here, and this image on the left is actually when we first started working with Receipt Bank. We talk about how we get information in, and as you can see, it's pretty messy. There's a lot of arrows. We had to get different pieces to different people, and there just wasn't a clean flow. So just going through the process of walking through our data flow really showed us that we need a better way to manage our information and make sure that it's going places that we need to, so that we can make some good decisions. Eventually, we go somewhat on the picture on the right. So we determined this specifically to move information from into a payable solution into finally our general ledger, which was QuickBooks Online. But it also gave us a way to identify other pieces of data, which isn't necessarily a specific transactional piece of information. It was just in this case, we were using minutes and bylaws for a nonprofit. But as you can see, you have arrows that you can follow, identifiable path for information. And when you have something like this, it's much easier to identify when you have a breakdown of information, and you can find out exactly where the breakdown was, what caused the breakdown, and find some kind of solution. So we've done several of these workflows as we talk with clients. It starts out, like I said, the process, but ideally towards the end, you get to something that's a little more refined and a little bit more personal looking, I would say, but just a little bit cleaner. John, I do have a question for you. As you work with partners and small businesses, do you find that most businesses have a similar kind of mess getting started?
So I would say absolutely. Oftentimes when people are seeking out a tech, a tech stack, and are seeking to establish an ecosystem, they're in the beginning stages. And this is, and so what ends up happening is that I end up working with people who, Receipt Bank, they've heard about us, they know what we do, they've seen the value that we add, but it's still a little unclear how it can fit exactly in. And I think the difference between the whiteboard on the left and the chart on the right is night and day, as far as really streamlining the process so that you can figure out exactly where the bottlenecks are. Because I think that it also involves how you should, how each team member fits into those steps. So you could see then from all the green how JCCS was able to simplify and organize the different sources and be able to map it out. They've identified who needs to be responsible at every stage and identify at which stage the tech needs to come in to facilitate that process. So clearly it's worked. We work hand in hand with JCCS with a lot of the input information, that they're getting from their clients. And I think that they're also in a great place to even help advise you on the best ways to streamline your business, so you're as cost effective and streamlined as possible too.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned bottlenecking, because that's something that I didn't mention, but it is a huge issue, I think, for our clients and for us as well. We did talk about it in our data episode, and how bottlenecking and having the right people in the right seats is imperative to good data management. And the same goes for your tech stack and ecosystem. Making sure that you have alleviated those bottlenecks, you've got the right people in the right seats, they're doing what they need to do, can really help your ecosystem work as it should, as a cycle, throughout that data cycle as well. John, do you have any other thoughts on developing your ecosystem, or did we pretty much cover everything pretty well?
I think we covered things pretty well. I think just the key takeaway is to identify the why. What are you trying to accomplish? It's not about signing up for the next big shiny thing. It's about identifying the why. It's about mapping out the how, and then figuring out where these softwares fit in.
I think this exercise.
Go ahead.
I think this exercise here is one step that historically a lot of businesses have overlooked, including ourselves, when we're looking at new tech. And when you're walking through this, it's amazing how many things come to light. The people at the top, or the people making that decision on the technology, a lot of times they don't know the flow of the mail, or how many people are involved in that, and just something so minor that we can cut out so much unnecessary time. Yeah, so this whole workflow process is really fun to work with a client on.
Definitely. And as you do build your workflow and you start fitting in different pieces of technology, the next important step is integration. And Brenda's going to go over integration a little bit, why it matters, and then we'll touch on the rest of the tools that JCCS uses.
Yeah, great. So most of us have been involved in some level of integration in our accounting records. So whether that's how you're incorporating your bills into your accounting software, your customer invoices, your payroll records, there's some sort of integration. But is it as streamlined as it can be? When we first started talking about this, it was just very overwhelming to me personally. I've been in the business for many years, so I've seen the progression of technology. Always a little scary, people moving my cheese. So, but it takes a little getting used to, and when you do, it's just amazing the changes that can happen. The first client that I worked on with our new tech stack was a client that was working in QuickBooks Online, and they were doing their accounting in QuickBooks Online, but we were doing their payroll in our server-based payroll software. So what that meant was at the end of the payroll cycle, I would send them a list of all the checks that they had written, and then I would send them a journal entry to account for all of those gross tax amounts that don't show up on that net check. So they would get this information, they would have to take time, or somebody in their office would have to take time to hand key that information into QuickBooks Online. So not only does it take a lot of time, but it's just a door that's wide open for data entry errors. So the first one that I did, we moved that payroll from the server-based payroll software to our cloud-based software. And so we're using Payroll Relief. It's fully in the cloud, and it integrates seamlessly with QuickBooks Online. Much like Receipt Bank also integrates seamlessly with QuickBooks Online. So what does that mean? That means that I process payroll. When I'm done, I go to the Integrate with QuickBooks Online button, put my date range in, hit Integrate, and immediately within a minute or two, the payroll information is in QuickBooks Online. The checks are there, the entry is there to gross up all the taxes. So there's no avenue for error, really. Well, and I shouldn't say no avenue for error, there's always room for error, but it's really minimizing that error. And then it's also taking that time out of that person's day to enter all that information, and you're getting that time back. So it's just, when I went through that process, I was sold. I was like, all right, what else can we do? So it's a lot of fun. Erin, I know you've got some other examples of successful integration.
I do. Actually, one specifically with Receipt Bank and some of our other tech stack solutions. So we recently, as everyone knows, have been in a pandemic and had to go fully remote. Well, we had onboarded a client back in, I want to say December, onto using Receipt Bank, and then also using Bill.com as our payables solution, and QBO, QuickBooks Online, as our accounting solution. And the ability of the client to take pictures with their phones and scan stuff directly into Receipt Bank, where then I could view the picture that they took, the invoice itself, all of the detail on that, make sure it's coded, send it off directly to Bill.com so it could then be paid electronically, and then feed over into QBO, let us continue to work. It was kind of business as usual for them because we didn't have any breakdown in everyone having to shelter in place or stay at home. We could continue working. The client was able to move some of their employees remote, so they were still continuing to do work. And just the ease with that shift was amazing. And because we had gotten them on earlier, it was, like I said, business as usual. Receipt Bank was fantastic in how quickly it pulled that information in, and it does have a little bit of machine learning, so it was auto categorizing some of the invoices that came in. So I was doing some minimal work in the review and looking at them, and then actually spending more time evaluating the accuracy of the data on the invoice as opposed to keying in everything. And then having our other solutions, Bill.com, Remit Payment, and QBO feed it directly into all of our reports was pretty fantastic. And like I said, seamless, made going remote to shelter in place super easy and super simple. I do want to talk a little bit about what Brenda said, and that it's not an easy shift. Thinking about implementing these things can be difficult, can be scary. We usually like to preface it that there will be at least one thing that doesn't work exactly as we planned, but we try to have an open communication about that, so that we can easily identify where the issue happened and then how to fix it. So I think that's one of my favorite examples of successful integration, where we had it tying all across. It was a little scary in December when we were implementing it, but we came out to now way ahead of where we would have been if we hadn't integrated anything. John, I have a question for you, and that is suggestions on best practices when it comes to integrating, because it can be scary, and if something doesn't integrate right, it can be a pretty significant mess to clean up. So at Receipt Bank, do you have any best practices?
So for us, we think that it's really critical to know how each tool speaks to one another so that you're not duplicating processes. But one of the things that we remind our partners is don't be afraid to allow yourself a little trial and error, just like you said. You can figure out how each software communicates with each other, and then that can help you identify shortfalls in the software to know where maybe a human component could fit in. Because because you have to remember, because this is, take a step back. This is actually something that sometimes I have to remind the partners that I work with, is that, they want Receipt Bank to do everything. And there's that expectation across all these softwares, is that you really want an all-in-one solution. Now, we do what we do very, very well, data extraction and data collection, but we're not going to sit here and pretend that we can do everything. And neither can any other software. If software were meant to be perfect, then none of us would have a job, because the software would just do it all. So there's always a component for humans. And I think Erin had a great example. We do utilize machine learning and AI, but at the end of the day, she still had to spend some time reviewing the items, but it still helped facilitate that process, eliminated the bottleneck of getting the information that she needed, so that she can continue on with the value-adding work. So here's an example that I think of really how the human component and the software component sort of work together. So like we have a functionality that allows our partner accountants to run reports on items that are missing, that have come through their accounting software's bank feeds. So essentially, these are things that, we see the transaction has been made, but we also can see that you haven't submitted it. Now, in the past, you would have to sort of do a manual back and forth checking, and that is an identified, waste of time efficiency. So let's help run those reports so that now the human component kicks in, the actual value adding human component of reaching out, of saying, hey, you need to get these items so that we can create XYZ report. And then you can, of course, go from there. So integration is extremely important, because we think that, that there are certain things that you just shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be keying in things in a spreadsheet. You shouldn't be like manually clicking through or having someone exclusively dedicated to data entry. Those are the type of things where, if you can repurpose that employee for something else that can be much more value added, then that's overall going to increase the quality and efficiency of the service that you're providing. And so that's the main thing that we want to preach. And that's why we try as hard as we can to integrate with as many different softwares as possible.
I love that you talked about that, not replacing a person, there's a human component, because all of these applications and tech solutions, they don't fully replace them. You still have things that you have to do, but you can spend it on the more, how do I want to term it? Just the more human pieces. Like you aren't spending time keying stuff in. You're looking at what the information is telling you. And as we go through the rest of our webinars, we'll reiterate on this over and over, is that some people think tech is taking our jobs and taking what we do. And the answer to that is no, it's not. It's just altering what we do. It makes what we do, and small business owners, it makes what they do more valuable. And they get to do a lot, like as to data processing, which isn't the most fun. I mean, some people have fun with it. Data analytics is very important, but just the hand-keying of numbers is not something that we should have to spend our time doing anymore. Brenda, did you have anything?
Well, I think that I think that this kind of goes back to, I think it was Drew that talked about it in episode 1, as far as there's certain key factors that technology cannot pull out. You know, they can't tell you that your sales are going to thrive when the weather tanks. So for that owner to be able to focus on that and put that human knowledge side by side with the technology that comes out, I mean, that's where you're going to move the needle.
Totally agree.
And I do love that John talked about the fact that his software does this function very well, and they don't need to do everything. I think people are a lot of times looking for that one-stop shop. But even when you have that, if you have a software that maybe it does track inventory, it doesn't mean that that is the software that's going to do inventory for you the best way. So I think it's always important for people, even if they have a solution, to really vet it out. And maybe there's an application that integrates with your existing software that does that function better.
Definitely agree. So as we were mentioning, we were going to talk about the stuff that JCCS uses for our tech stack. We are 3 minutes over the 30 minutes, so hopefully we have a couple people who can stick around. We'll finish this up. As I'm sure everyone knows, we do work with ReceiptBank to do our collection. We haven't implemented it with everyone, but it is on our roadmap to get all clients using it. So if you haven't yet and you're a client, you will. We use ReceiptBank as data collection. We'll talk about in our upcoming books, both online and desktop, what is best for which situation. Brenda mentioned Payroll Relief as our, I'm sorry if I'm cutting out. I think I might be a little bit, but Payroll Relief is our cloud-based payroll solution, and we'll talk how we're using that along with a couple other tools to augment payroll services and turn it from something that can be seen as a necessary evil to an actual employee benefit. Then episode 5, we're going to bring in Anna from our CAS department, and she's going to help us talk about way more apps that we can add to our tech stack and what we can do and how they benefit us. And then, as we mentioned, episode 6, we're going to bring Tony and Drew back. We're going to talk about what everything tells us. Like I said, that one's probably going to be about 60 minutes long. We expect the others to be maybe 35 minutes. We'll give a little bit of an extra minute or two in there instead of just 30 minutes. So I wanted to see if there were any questions about the day, or any last thoughts from either Brenda or John.
No, we did have one question just regarding what payroll software we use for the cloud-based solution, and that is Payroll Relief in Accountants World. And with any of these that we have mentioned, if you want more information on them, please reach out to Erin or myself, and we'll get you some more information or get you in touch with somebody at our local office to visit more with you.
John, you have any final thoughts?
I do. I would say as well that when you're implementing these softwares, don't be afraid to go, if you're working directly with JCCS, as you probably should be, don't be afraid to go to them for help. But also, don't be afraid to leverage these software support teams. They're there to help work with you to identify all the ways that you can leverage the software so you're maximizing its utility in your workflow. Because odds are, and I can attest to it, someone has asked that question before, and they can give you a good idea based on real world experiences. I can't tell you how many times in a day I end up saying, yeah, I actually, I have a partner who had this problem, and this is what we did. Something as simple as that, to know that one, you're not alone, but two, you're being proactive about wanting to make sure that you fully understand the softwares that are a component of your tech stack. And if you work directly with JCCS, they would be, they would work with me. If you wanted to know a bit about like what my role is, they would work with me to help identify those pitfalls in your process, which I think is a great example of advisory services. But it doesn't matter if it's us or with any other software. Don't be afraid to leverage their teams.
I would have to say, I think my final thought on this is, very similar to John's. Asking the question is extremely important. That's how we started. I think that's how we started when we first started looking at analyzing our workflow, is asking the question why, as Brenda discussed earlier. Why do we do what we do? Why are we looking at this? What can help us, and how can they help us? I think that's the most important, is just to start that conversation and whiteboard out. It's surprisingly informative. You'll learn a lot of stuff that you wouldn't have thought happens in your business before. It's pretty eye-opening. So I would encourage everyone to do that. We can definitely help you with that. Like I said, that's one of my favorite things to do, is just whiteboarding out processes and finding out ways that we can clean that up and make sure that your data is useful. Brenda, a final thought, and then we do have one question.
I guess my final thought is just don't be afraid to change, and don't be afraid to explore what's out there. I'm probably not the one on the forefront of change. I think Erin is kind of the driver force behind all of our technology changes, and I'm the one back there like, are you sure this is a good idea? But I can tell you that every single change that we've made that has been properly vetted out has been a positive change, and it's really brought a lot of value to our firm and to our clients. And it's fun. It's fun to be able to go out to a client and actually talk about the end result instead of the beginning data entry. And so that's the part that I get excited about.
Great. So we do have one question. Carrie from our Whitefish office asked if we can explain the difference between ReceiptBank and Bill.com for people who haven't used either of them before. John, can I just one at you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that this is a great example of what we talked about earlier about find the software that does what you're looking for it to do. Find the software that does it the best. So in this case, for instance, Bill.com is a payable solution, right? You use it to gather invoices that need to be paid, and you pay them. And then you transfer the information over into whatever your accounting software is. For ReceiptBank, we are essentially a pre-accounting solution. We're there to gather the data, organize it, extract the information from it, get it ready for your review, so you're not hunting down paperwork, you're not hunting down the clients. We don't pay bills yet, right? But at this point, though, because we don't do that, you would need something, like Bill.com or something even similar. And to an older point as well, a previous point as well about integrations, we integrate with Bill.com. So it's because we recognize that that is a critical component of certain workflows, is that for things that have already been paid, those are great things to just push directly to your accounting software. Whereas for things that need to be paid, you could still push it to Receipt Bank first, because again, we're there to organize that data, to help you identify what needs to go where. And then from Receipt Bank, you can actually push into Bill.com. So we actually can work together. It's not necessarily, head to head.
Perfect. That's exactly what I would have said. Probably not as well as you did. So I think that is it for our questions. We are 11 minutes over time, but thank you all who attended. I know we have a lot of employees, so thank you for coming. Thanks for everyone else who came. Like I said, we've got 5 episodes coming up: QuickBooks, payroll, other app, and our final webinar, which will combine everything that we talked about. I think that's it. Thank you all so much for attending, and hope you all have a great Tuesday and the rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John.